America is unique among the nations as a beacon of freedom and hope. Interestingly, the seeds for this great nation were sown by a very small group of weary sojourners we know as the Pilgrims. All that the Pilgrims who settled Plymouth, Massachusetts wanted was religious freedom. Nonetheless, in their quest for that freedom, this small group of Christian men and women ended up casting a long and positive shadow in American history and even world history. Author Michelle Gallagher, who lives in Plymouth, wrote a beautiful guidebook to the huge Forefathers Monument in Plymouth, dedicated to the memory of the Pilgrims. I got to sit down and speak with her about the legacy of the Pilgrims. When you think about the Pilgrims in terms of the way people think of them today, do you feel like, well, we would do well as a society and as a nation if we got back to some of the principles the Pilgrims established?
Oh gosh, absolutely. And it's really remarkable. I often tease that, in our modern society, sometimes it's difficult to even organize a block party, without infighting. But when you imagine what they were able to accomplish, think of this, part of a congregation coming and then joining on the Mayflower with other people that they called strangers on the boat because they were outside of the Pilgrim congregation. So people they'd never met before, that they are thrown together on this very arduous journey across the Atlantic. And then they get here, and because the land patent that they had originally for Virginia, because they veered off course, so now they find themselves in Cape Cod, they decide that this is a suitable location for their new colony. Because they have no legal land patent, they create the Mayflower Compact. And the fact that they were able to work together, not only with people that were part of their congregation that they obviously dearly loved, but relative strangers, that they were able to cobble together and create consensus and to create the Mayflower Compact and to say that we are going to create fair and just laws for the governing of all. It's actually remarkable. It's remarkable.
The Mayflower Compact was an agreement, a written agreement for self-government under God, self-rule under God. And many historians say it basically culminates 150 years later with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
Absolutely.
You want to comment on that?
It's so true. And the Founding Fathers, when they were writing their documents that really gave birth to America, they were inspired by the Mayflower Compact. They were inspired by the Magna Carta. They looked to these types of covenant agreements, and they were very influential, not just in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but in when the original 13 colonies started. If you look at those, all of those 13 colonies, if you look at the original constitutions, the original Constitution of Massachusetts and all of them, they all have a very similar mention, and that's one of the things that. A very similar format. You can tell that they're inspired by it, and that was one of the things that I included in the book. Is I kind of show a side-by-side parallel where you have the Mayflower Compact, and then you have the Massachusetts State Constitution, and then you have the Declaration of Independence. And when you look at them side by side, it's startling how similar the wording is. So they were clearly inspired by that.
Some people today present the Pilgrims as if they came in and they stole the land from the Indians and they mistreated the Native Americans and other crimes.
Sure.
Is that true?
We are a flawed people. There's certainly no question that there's a history of abuses in our nation. But the Pilgrims really get a bad rap. One of the things people don't realize is that when the Pilgrims came, they came in a spirit of peace. They came in a spirit of settling in a new nation. They wanted to bring the gospel. The Mayflower Compact says, for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. They came because they wanted to share the gospel with the natives, and they had remarkable success with that. But one of the things that they did, they created in Massachusetts the first registry of deeds. And the reason that they did that was because they wanted to prevent there from being abuses. As subsequent ships came in and other people started to come and settle, they were concerned that, for example, the natives were being, plied with alcohol and convinced to sign away things. And so they created a registry of deeds because they wanted to force people to come in and file a formal document to prevent abuses. So their intent was really, and they accomplished, really so many wonderful things in terms of establishing peace, establishing fairness, justice, and all of those types of things. And it was all based on a biblical worldview.
The goal of the Pilgrims was just to basically worship Jesus in the purity of their conscience.
Absolutely.
And yet they end up casting a long and positive shadow in what became the United States of America. Do you think that's a fair statement?
That's an absolutely fair statement. And as I studied the Pilgrim story, I was absolutely amazed at their spiritual devoutness, their faithfulness to God. You know, we live in a climate right now where oftentimes believers can become bashful about sharing their faith, or, you know, if the government pushes back, they can feel reluctant to speak freely or to worship God freely. And when you look at the lives of these people, what they risked, you know, many of them were shunned in society. They were betrayed by their closest family and friends. Many of them went to jail. Some were martyred. You know, when they brought the Mayflower over, when they came over, many of them left their own children and their families behind and never saw them again. And they came and they endured so much hardship. And the only way that they were able to endure that is because they absolutely wanted to worship God in spirit and in truth, but in freedom. They didn't want the king to dictate and tell them how they were going to worship God. They read the Bible for themselves. They saw how God had told them to live and serve Him, and they wanted to worship Him in truth, and they were willing to risk everything to do that. So it's very inspiring.
Paul Jaley, the president of the Plymouth Rock Foundation, is an expert on the Pilgrims. He once made a powerful observation. He said, in this world, there are those who have and perhaps seek power, and then there are others who seek to influence others. The Pilgrims who founded Plymouth, Massachusetts, were not people of power in the least. They were virtually outcasts of society. However, they proved to be very influential in world history. Using the Bible as their guide, they created a political charter, the Mayflower Compact, which is a Christian document, and it ended up beginning the whole process of constitution making in America, culminating 150 years later in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So the Pilgrims, though not powerful at all by worldly standards, proved to be tremendously influential in world history in a positive way. For Providence Forum, I'm Dr. Jerry Newcombe.